jet and having the power behind you and you feeling that power as you go down the runway is awesome.
Your adrenaline is up. You know that they're really shooting at you with real missiles and real bullets.
For the first time in almost 50 years, Canadian jet fighters play a major role in battle. Korea to Kosovo, next. Aviano, Italy. An Italian city in the shadow of the Dolomites. For 79 days, Aviano was the primary base for a massive NATO bombing campaign against Serbia. In the Kosovo crisis, for the first time in history, the conflict was decided by air power alone. An examination of Canada's role in the air offensive demonstrates how smaller nations can usefully function in a NATO military operation. Almost half a century after the first Canadian airmen flew jets in the Korean War, young Canadian F-18 pilots like Captain Mike Grover experienced the reality of combat, flying the 18 F-18 fighter bombers Canada placed under NATO command.
Got some there.
The first time you step up that ladder, tremendous anxiety. I guess you're thinking a lot about it. Like, no kidding, this is going to be the first time somebody really is going to be shooting back at you because you're dropping stuff on them, you know. What we're holding here right now in Aviano is ground alert CAS. It's ground alert close air support. We have the F-18 loaded up with bombs and air-to-air missiles. And if called upon, we scramble to the jets, start it up, and take off to use the bombs to assist the NATO troops.
6 Canadian F-18s remain in Aviano. Only one is on standby. But there is no let-up in training flights. Fighter pilots who don't constantly exercise their flying skills swiftly lose their edge.
Being in a jet and having the power behind you and you feeling that power as you go down the runway is awesome. It's a joy to fly. It's the capability from an air to ground, dropping bombs, air to air, and just the potential threat that you could face. It was willing to totally meet that capability.
Major Steve Will racked up 1,000 peacetime hours in F-18s, and like many of the NATO pilots, always wondered how he would stack up if it came to the real thing.
I'd have to admit I was curious to see how I would do when it really came down to flying combat missions, and getting out here, leading the new guys across the line basically and getting the job done was about the biggest challenge I've ever had in my life. I remember leading the 6 jets in from Germany. The first thing that struck my mind pitching out over the airfield was, my God, there are a whole lot of airplanes here. It was just packed with airplanes.
During the bombing campaign, up to 800 warplanes were based at Aviano.
The next 3 days were literally a blur. We were sat down, we were given our initial in-briefs, our theater briefs. I think I was doing my first mission 4 days after I was on the ground. I was flying my first combat mission. Honestly, if you would ask me 2 years ago if I'd ever thought that I'd really be in a combat scenario, I would have said probably not. If you look at it since, say, the Korean War, there haven't been any Canadian pilots that have been in combat. You're talking almost a good 40 years there. We just don't do it that often.
Although new to combat, and with only 18 Hornets in action at the height of the offensive, the Canadians flew 10% of NATO's strike missions. Next, going to war with the Balkan Rats. Captain Mike Grover had flown F-18s for only 1 year when he was ordered to Aviano. Fighter pilots like Grover trained for war, with little expectation they would ever be called upon to go into battle.
The night before my first mission, you're just a lot of thinking about it and really thinking about, geez, this time there's guys actually going to be shooting at you, and that's definitely running through your mind. That moment you stepped up the ladder and getting the jet started, it sort of went away a bit. Once you took off on the mission, you just had too many things to think about, really, and it sort of went away.
There's a pretty big difference for your first few missions. Your adrenaline is up, especially when you're leading. There's a lot on your mind, plus just the knowledge that this is the real thing now. And I guess there's two ways to look at it. One is you know that they're really shooting at you with real missiles and real bullets, whereas in training, you just know in the back of your mind that that's not a fact. Shot at a couple times by AAA, which really isn't very effective when we're at high altitudes. Some of our guys here with the Canadians were shot at with missiles. At night, you can see them a lot better.
Every time I went flying, there was stuff coming up all the time. The AAA, we flew day and night missions, and it was more prevalent at night as far as you could see the tracers, and that was different, that's for sure, having seen it come up at night at you, and in the day you know that it's out there, but you can't really see it as well, so it's a little unnerving.
The Yugoslav AAA anti-aircraft artillery caused no damage to NATO's high-flying jets.
And you did the mission, you came back, and again, once you landed, that's when you started thinking about it a little bit more and thinking, wow, I was very lucky this time to not get anything shot at me or get shot down or anything like that, because you don't want that to happen. I always wanted to be a pilot, one of those cliche stories, I guess, but my father was a pilot, and something that was sort of, I guess, I grew up with, and it just seemed very interesting. My favorite memory is going fishing in Penticton. Once in a while, you'd set the pontoons right down on the lake, and you could fish right off the side of the helicopter. And my dad would be on one side, and I'd be on the other side, and we'd be pulling up 2-pound trouts out of these hidden lakes in the Okanagan Valley.
Major Steve Will also grew up in an aviation family.
My dad worked on airplanes. He was stationed in Europe, worked on Sabres. Back home in Canada, he'd take me up to the base, and we lived in North Bay. He'd show me the CF-100s and T-33s, and I got to sit in the airplanes. And from when I can remember, I've always been fascinated with airplanes. I've always wanted to fly.
Years of training, 1,000 hours in F-18s, prepared Steve Will for the Kosovo campaign. But no amount of training prepares a pilot to face surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery, and the Balkan Rats sought to avoid them.
Most of the profiles that we flew in order to stay out of the surface-to-air missile engagement rings were fairly high, basically above 20,000 feet pretty much all the time. You normally wouldn't go through a mission, though, without at least someone looking at you with a radar of some sort. Of course, we get the indications in the cockpits. So we maneuver the jet. We're always very cautious. Put out some chaff, which is self-defense. You know, if things didn't look good or we're feeling overly threatened, we would just turn around and leave.
The Canadian pilots were led by Colonel William Flynn.
We walked into a war. So we walked in, settled in, barely figured out time zones, and it was night one of the attacks. And that's all we know in our existence here. The manic existence that we lived was sustained for basically the better part of 3 months. You know what? We stepped to the table and got invited to play just like everybody else. And we, the collective group, were spectacular.
Organizing the air war was a complex operation. For the Canadian Task Force, 18 Hornets armed with precision weapons had to be ready to fly up to 20 sorties a day. Canadians were involved at every level, from helping select targets at NATO's KOC, the Combined Air Operations Center at Vincenza, to maintaining the Hornets, with rates of availability of over 90%. Task Force Colonel Andre Vienne.
Canada agreed to provide at some point up to 18 airplanes for the Allied force operation. And the KOC was responsible at that point to utilize those airplanes based on the conditions that Canada had agreed with for some specific roles. So the KOC is just like a normal headquarters, but it's a multinational headquarters. And its role was to control the air campaign, to plan the air campaign basically on a 72-hour to 96-hour cycle ahead of the events taking place. So the targets are not selected by the nation. They're selected by the organization of NATO, which all nations are participants to that organization.
On the northeast corner of this town here, the collateral rating for this one's high.
Modern warfare is hemmed in by countless treaties and conventions. Target selection and mission planning for the F-18s was vetted by a Canadian Forces lawyer. Major Kirby Abbott's job is to keep Canadian pilots from breaking international law.
For whatever reason you're up there, you've got to go through different access, and then we just abort the mission.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
It's forbidden for any military to target civilians or civilian infrastructure. The targets that we've been given are really targets that truly have a military significance to it. After that, we have an obligation to minimize collateral damage. There's nobody here at all that wants to cause collateral damage or inadvertently cause any damage at all to civilians.
Despite all the precautions, more than 25% of NATO bombs failed to hit their intended target. Many went astray and caused collateral damage to homes and buildings. The number of casualties is not known.
We normally fly with 2 laser-guided bombs, 1 on each wing. And self-defense, when we're doing that, we'll carry our air-to-air missiles. So we'll normally have 2 AIM-9s, 1 on each wingtip and 1 AIM-7. If we're in a defensive mission where we're doing simply a CAP, combat air patrol, then we normally have 4 AIM-7s, 4 radar-guided missiles, and 2 AIM-9s, the heat-seeking missiles, and of course we always have the gun. We primarily used our laser-guided munitions, either 500 or 2,000-pound bombs. We also used our 500-pound unguided bombs at times. But I would say our weapon of choice for the whole war would have been our laser-guided bombs.
Say I saw the target. If you're coming down here and you can punt the nose over and the diamond is basically pointing right where you want it to.
Certainly here the potential for collateral damage was so huge, and it would be absolutely unacceptable to attempt to take out any of these targets that are even remotely close to civilian population without minimizing the risks. But we bring the risk with these type of weapons down to the absolute minimum. You know when you hit that pickle button and you release weapons, that something that is going to make a lot of damage on the ground has just left your aircraft, and you had better be absolutely positive that this weapon is going exactly where you want it to. There is a fighter pilot prayer that's very short and sweet and to the point, and it goes like, "Please, Lord, don't let me screw up."
What do you think?
Great, so what do you think of the spotter?
2 jet fighter pilots from wars of half a century ago compared notes with Steve Will and Mike Grover when the F-18 pilots returned to Canadian Forces Base Cold Lake, Alberta. Next.
turn around. I was home long enough to do my laundry and then turn around and go back for another couple of months.
Steve Will has flown back to his home base at Cold Lake to refresh his skills in dogfighting. Flightpath arranged for two of Canada's first jet fighter pilots, Omer Levesque and Eric Smith, to meet Will and Mike Grover to compare notes. Here in Cold Lake, the oldest and the newest Canadian veterans of combat in jet aircraft.
And it's great because it's not like
For Levesque and Smith, an opportunity to see how dramatically the technology of jet warfare has changed since they went aloft in F-86 Sabres during the Korean War.
We didn't know the future at all about Korea. To me, it was somewhere in the Far East. I barely had a few hours on a Sabre. I feel the same way about the chaps who were flying the F-18 to Yugoslavia. Same spirit.
That spirit was carried to Korea by Canadian Air Force exchange pilots, flying American Sabres against Soviet MiG-15s in the early 1950s. The first jet-against-jet encounters, a new page in the history of aviation.
We didn't know we were going to Korea when I was at Langley Air Force Base in 1950. And I was on alert in June. However, the Americans were using a whole 75 Sabres, putting them together, and having us doing lots of air gunnery. Chinese were rolling over from the Yalu, which was absolutely unexpected. So we're told that we'd be on our way pretty soon. There was quite a lot of anxiety from the wing commander about what kind of aircraft we're going to encounter. Nobody could get close to the MiG-15. It was an unknown. To our surprise, Colonel Hinton happened to get after that first MiG and hit it, and that was the start of the interest of that ghost aircraft.
The MiG-15 was a worthy adversary. It could fly at much higher altitudes than Sabres, and MiG pilots could not be pursued beyond the Yalu River.
They had their sanctuary north of the Yalu River. We weren't allowed to cross the Yalu River because when we went north of the Yalu River, we were then over communist China. And we patrolled maybe at 36 to 38 to 40,000 feet.
Eric Smith flew Mosquitoes during World War II. When the Korean War broke out, he found himself back in combat.
On these patrols, you could look up and you could see them sitting up there at 52,000, 55,000 feet. They're up and they're painted light blue. So they could come down on you and back up at their own volition. They had this capability and we couldn't do anything about it because of our altitude limitation.
Soon a dogfight would develop, and they always lost height, and they were losing control. Maneuver was not near as maneuverable as ours. And Sabre was most steady and quick turning, full air condition, heat and control.
Eric Smith still fits comfortably into a Sabre cockpit.
Sure we need to get back up again, eh?
Yeah, this brings back a lot of memories. When I arrived in Korea, I was put in with Captain Bill Lilly, who ended up as one of my lifelong dear friends. I was assigned to his flight, and I flew his wing for 10 to 12, 15 missions. And on my second mission, we tangled with the MiG, and he shot it down. And shot down the MiG again on my fifth mission. And this pilot bailed out, and he had red hair. And he went right up over the canopy. I could see his mouth was open, gaping open. And so I think we pretty well proved from that observation that they had Russian pilots, or certainly wasn't Chinese pilots that was at the controls of that airplane.
Although they denied it at the time, the Russians sent some of their best pilots to fly with the inexperienced Chinese and North Koreans.
I was being fired by shells of the MiG-15 when they were escorting B-29 and bombed the Yalu River at high noon. That brought up the MiG-15, and within 10 minutes, it must have been 20, 30. and they surprised us. One fired on me with shells as I pulled tight. So I saw a big 33 millimeter shell being fired at me, just passing my tail, and 23 millimeters. And by pulling tight enough, I evaded losing the aircraft and myself.
The MiG-15 and Sabre were almost identical in appearance. They could both trace their ancestry to swept-wing jets and rockets launched by the Germans in the final days of World War II.
And they look so much alike, the Sabre and the MiG-15, that we had to have the boys maintenance to do all kinds of hard work painting those aircraft, like war paint, for instance, with black and white stripes on the wings, on the tail, on the fuselage. We thought we could be shooting each other instead of the enemy.
If you're locked on an enemy aircraft, you take your eyes off him, and then you go back. He may not be there when you look back because everything happens so fast. Seeing a head-on, we're doing about 9 miles a minute, which works out to about 2,000 feet a second. You haven't got much time to think about it. And this guy turned with me, and we ended up head-on again. So then he had zoomed back up to his sanctuary up at over 50,000. He thought, well, I guess this guy's not too easy to take on, so he took off. But the thing, it happened so fast, 10 seconds sometimes, and it's all over. I was another time, with my friend, and we counted 44 contrails coming towards us. So it was just Lily and I up together, just the two of us. So it's quite a decision for a flight leader to make. Do we engage these 44 MiGs, or do we retired from that? We just pulled out of there with using a lot of common sense so that we'd fly to fight another day.
For dogfight veterans, the knowledge the CF-18 has a machine gun is a comfort.
So it shoots the one barrel right down the front, 20 millimeters, 6,000 rounds a minute. So
I wouldn't fly a fighter without guns, the type that we're used to from Second World War onward, cannons and shells, because you could be in a very bad spot at some time, and that's the only chance you'll get out of it alive.
Early Sabres carried 6 50 caliber machine guns as their only armament.
Okay, Swell, go ahead and take off. Okay.
Omer and Eric at an F-18 simulator find that a gun is almost the only thing the old Sabre jets and the modern F-18s have in common.
So mainly what we're going to watch here is this screen here. That's where you're going to be looking when you're flying.
The Sabre, for example, it was at that time we thought a complicated airplane, one of the first jets for combat.
you can increase it to a 60-degree bank turn to the right.
It was a straightforward, no computer systems, ordinary guns. The controls of the pilot was all eyeballed. This F-18, the whole aircraft was controlled by computers.
And now give her a good roll to the right.
Whereas we just had machine guns, laser bombs, guided bombs, and it goes on and on.
Keep pushing forward.
I think the missile is definitely in the right direction to improve air gun rate. It's always been the biggest problem.
Try rolling to the left.
But it was always the aircraft being lighter and being able to outturn the enemy.
Gear up now.
The two veterans find one of the last Sabres still flying. It's still their favorite.
You can't help it having your mind set on that aircraft because it was about the most successful aircraft in this period, shooting down enemy aircraft.
All right, well, would you like to take it up for again?
It was possibly the last of the smaller fighter, and yet with a long range. It wasn't just a defensive fighter. And we had full confidence over North Korea.
Well, I always said this is my favorite airplane. It's the last airplane that was really could do justice in a real dogfight. It's an airplane where you feel part of it.
This Sabre jet is far from obsolete. It still has a role to play with Canada's F-18s.
What is this red thing here?
This is the dart. Actually, we use this up in Cold Lake, and it's kind of neat. The Sabre actually comes up every few months and flies around in a pattern, in a circular pattern. We come in and shoot at it. It's unique in the way that this device actually scores hits electronically, so that we know instantaneously. The pilot can tell us exactly how many hits on each pass, and we can use that for our training to modify our next pass.
For several weeks each year, the Sabre challenges the pilots at Cold Lake flying target practice. The Sabre's turning ability and speed matches the Hornet's perfectly.
I've never even gotten the cockpit of a Sabre, so I don't know how tight that was.
Maybe the 104 is so different.
Yeah. We're learning how to fly fighters now. We actually study right back to World War I, the tactics that the World War I fighter pilots devised, and how things expanded as the aircraft got faster, more maneuverable through World War II, through Korea, through the Cold War, right up to what we do today. And we're constantly evolving our tactics. So on that level, I think it's critical that we keep in contact with people like that. On the heritage side of things, it's outstanding for our squadron to have these guys come back, and for our young fighter pilots to get to know these guys that flew Spitfires and Mosquitoes and Sabres through their whole career. It just links the past to what we're doing right now, and I think it gives everybody a real feeling of pride.
The Hornet is much more than a fighter. With its laser-guided bombs, one F-18 can destroy a target that might have required the bomb loads of scores of heavy bombers during World War II. The Hornet Sting, next. The CF-18s have only recently been upgraded to carry laser-guided weapons, an ability which carries with it an increased NATO role. The forward-looking infrared, FLIR, and laser that pinpoints targets for laser-guided bombs are the keys to the F-18's high degree of accuracy.
So this is the FLIR pod, which basically has two components in it. One is the forward-looking infrared portion of it, which is just a heat seeker, heat sensor basically, that takes a look at any difference in heat and gives you a picture. The other portion of it is the laser, which works independently and will fire by either the command of the computer if it's set up properly and you release a weapon, or you can actually manually fire the laser too to guide a weapon if you want to. When we're looking at a target, in that FLIR pod we've got a little diamond, and where that diamond is where the pod is predicting that the laser will hit the ground. The computer will tell us when to release the weapon, and we'll release it at that point, and then sometime during the bomb time of flight, we'll activate the laser. If we were to drop it without lasing, it would hit within about 500 feet of the target pretty consistently. Obviously that's not good enough, so that laser corrects that 500-foot error right at the very end of the bomb time of flight to actually hit exactly where you want it to.
Two bridges funnel yourself into the valley running north-south. Take the north side up against the woodlot. You should see the barracks, which stand out quite remarkably right out here.
Hours of flight planning precede every mission. Nothing is left to chance.
We'll fly through at that point. Expect us to be about 1.5 miles past the target, and we're looking for a 180-degree turn there. Today, the target that we've simulated hitting were barracks just on the outskirts of a city. You can follow the road pattern up here. Then we took a look at the photograph, and we identified some features on the photograph that we would see in our targeting plot. And we can compare what we see on the FLIR, on the forward-looking infrared, to the photo that we have and make absolutely sure that we're on the right target. And we actually carry the photo right in the cockpit with us. It'll help us get our eyes onto the target and get the targeting system onto the target.
You got the push-strike refueling, and that's been approved.
When we're assigned a target, it comes out in the air tasking order. From that, our intelligence people have folders, maps, and all the target data that we require to plan our attack on. They would decide what type of positions within the airfield that we'd want to hit. Perhaps we wanted to crater their runway, or take out their fuel supplies, or damage the hangars. I can take a look at that and decide the best angle, the best method, altitude, and weapon to attack the target with. There's a whole myriad of different methods that we gather target data with. It can be anything from satellite shots, and they can be cameras or infrared or radar. Can go down from there to high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft such as U-2s, SR-71s. From there down to medium to low altitude with just normal aircraft, F-16s configured with cameras, UAVs, such as Predators, basically unmanned aerial vehicles that are remotely controlled, that fly around at low level and target things. All that can be synthesized into our whole target data array.
This F-18 is set up for the ground close air support role. It carries a number of bombs and air-to-air missiles for that role. This is where the gun port is. It's a 20-millimeter cannon. And the rounds, the 20-millimeter rounds, come out of this port right up here. This is one of the two types of air-to-air missiles that the F-18 carries. It's the AIM-7 radar missile, and it uses the radar on board the aircraft that's in the nose to help seek and find its target. This is the second type of air-to-air missile we have on board. It's the AIM-9 Sidewinder. It's a heat-seeking missile, and it works in conjunction with a radar on board, or it can work without it as well. Different covers here protect the components of the missile, and they also, there's a pin there that provides a safe arming device on the ground. We also carry the air-to-ground bombs. This is the precision-guided munition, GBU-12. It's a 500-pound class bomb, and the main bomb body is this section right in here. This will be the actual part that'll blow up when it hits the target. The control section is right here, and this is what guides it onto the reflected laser energy from the ground.
The silhouettes are stencils of the bombs that have actually been dropped by this aircraft. And starting from the left to right, we have different types of bombs that we've dropped and used in our inventory. This one here is the GBU-10. It's a smart bomb, precision-guided munition. It's a 2,000-pound bomb. The smaller one is precision-guided as well. It's a smart bomb, and it's a 500-pound bomb. This one inside here is basically the same bomb as all these. This is called the Mark 82, and it's a 500-pound bomb, but it's a dumb bomb. It does not have any precision-guided capability at all.
When we first came here, we only had the 500-pound bombs, and the need was identified for larger weapons, for the 2,000-pound bombs. A 500-pound bomb is not big enough to damage a bridge. You basically scrape the paint off it, and that would be that. A 2,000-pound bomb, however, will drop a bridge quite nicely. That's the type of target that we would go after with those. With the 500-pound bombs against a fuel storage site on an airfield, it's ideal because really you only have to get the bomb into the fuel site, and a small explosion is going to do the job for you quite nicely. Another one that I was involved with 4 aircraft was trying to seal off or shut down a tunnel that was running under an overpass. For that, you needed a lot of power from the bombs, and you also needed to be able to penetrate through the ground and have the bombs explode down inside the tunnels. For that type of mission, we used the 2,000-pound bombs, and that also was very successful. For the first month, more than half of our missions were not able to drop because of weather. All it takes is one cloud over top of the target that you can't guarantee that you laze the weapon to impact, and you don't drop.
The cancellation of strike missions because of bad weather over Serbia and the need to change the F-18's weapons loads for different targets and assignments meant extra work for ground crews.
A couple hours before the jets left, we would grab our weapons, load them up. Sometimes even after we did that, the mission would change, the weather would come in, they couldn't do that mission, so we had to download what we did loaded and upload different weapons for the overcast conditions and stuff like that. Other times we have to fly cap missions air to air. So that's a different config. You know, you no more bombs, you go strictly missiles. This war was right from the beginning when we got here. It was in full swing. We were dropping bombs. The guys would go out, and quite often they came back with their weapons. It got to be where the load crews would do more bomb dropping than the pilots because they'd have to take them off, reconfig for the next mission. It was basically go to work, 12 hours, and then give your debrief to the other crew, what's going on. And after that, you head back to accommodations, you crash right away, you wake up for about an hour and a half of relaxation time, then it was back here again and right into the grind.
Steve Will, like most other senior Hornet pilots, has spent time as a forward air controller, often working alongside ground troops to ensure close air support is delivered where it's needed. The forward air controller, or FAC, plays an important role on today's battlefield.
For a forward air controller on the ground or in the air, they are the final authority to drop weapons, and it's especially critical if we're in contact with our own friendly troops. From about 1994 to about 96, we had a lot of Air Force pilots in Bosnia playing the role of FAC or ALO, an air liaison officer. We did that because the potential for our troops or any other NATO troops to be very close to a situation where we had to drop ordnance was very, very high.
Our responsibility or mission is that if our ground forces were to come under any type of trouble, any type of fire, of course they can protect themselves, but we bring in air power, airplanes, to assist in them protecting themselves. And in the Bosnia theater of operation, the close air support and that we provided was, from what I saw firsthand, extremely effective. Just by providing an air presence to demonstrate that we could apply force, and that was enough to calm a number of situations down.
The forward air controllers that we were using here were normally airborne air controllers, AFACs we call them. So that would be an aircraft such as an A-10 or an F-16 that would be in the target area in front of us, usually a little lower than we were, with usually some very high power navigation and targeting pods. And these guys would be looking for mostly targets of opportunity. So if they could find some tanks moving down a road or artillery pieces or something like that, they would scope out these targets. We would hang back probably about 25 or 30 miles, and they would relay these targets to us. We'd then enter the area, and they would have to talk our eyes onto the target before we could release our weapons.
A coalition like NATO enables small military powers like Canada to play a role in international conflicts. Next. Few nations can afford all of the types of aircraft necessary to successfully mount an offensive of the type NATO launched against Serbia. Nations like Canada, with limited resources, can only function within the coalition.
Each nation's got a particular capability or set of capabilities they can come and offer to the table. Beside the United States, which probably has most, if not all, of the capability, all the other nations are lacking in some different field. That is either in jamming aircraft or suppression of enemy air defense aircraft, air refuelers. So this sort of proved that many nations, their only option to be able to get involved in a just cause like this Operation Allied Force was, is to be as part of a coalition or part of an alliance. And for Canada, no, we knew that already, but this was relearned for us.
This was a NATO operation. Any day you could be flying with British, French, Spanish, Americans, and any combination that you can possibly imagine. We plan together, we fly the missions together, we know the strengths and weaknesses of each country, and we use those to our maximum advantage.
We flew 10% of all the missions, the air-to-ground missions in the entire war, which is incredible for 18 Hornets, F-18s here in Aviano, when there was a total of over 800 airplanes, warplanes dropping bombs in the war. Every day we fight in a simulated war against the exact threat that we were flying against over here. Everybody was prepared, but the actual feeling of, again, having somebody shoot up at you or having another aircraft actually launch against you, it's a little unnerving before you step, but once you get in the airplane and you're into the mission, you just do what you have to do.
The fact that some guy's out to get you as aggressively as you're out to get him, and that's difficult to overcome. That takes a fair bit of time and a huge spike of emotion until you can actually get into the mission and focus on what you're supposed to be doing. And almost to a man, guys were able to get over that first hump, that first emotional peak, and get on to executing the mission.
Kilo 31, I'll be on a departure comment, maintain flight level 150. Up to 150.
Once you've been into combat, you have a few missions under your belt, it builds your self-confidence into knowing, yes, I can do this. And you never know, through all those years of training, you can be the best guy on the squadron, training-wise, but you don't know what you're going to react like in an actual combat situation. So that experience level in our Air Force is incredible, and new guys that come up through our ranks will have the benefit of that experience.
6 Bingo 6 takes us from the southernmost portion of the area. I'm a junior pilot myself, only on the squadron for a year, and most of the other people on our squadron have been on for 3-4 years, and we'll all take back the information we have and pass it on to the younger guys.
Let's go do that.
We learned an incredible amount of information and just data that we never had before as Canadians, to be able to take back and use that ourselves. A lot of times we've had to rely on the Americans on some of their databases for the information, and now we have our own data bank. I have a wife and a son and another child on the way back home. It's been tough being away from them, that's for sure, and everybody back at home supporting everybody that's here, no matter right from pods to ground crew to everybody that's working here. I think about it a lot. Yeah, we would email each other every other day, and we weren't allowed to talk about any part of the war mission at all, so it was just small talk for myself. Some of us, I think, had code set up to let our wives know when we'd actually flown, because you can't actually come out and say that, I flew a mission today, because for comm security, if I'd flown a mission that day, I would just say that I'd eaten a pepperoni pizza, and Allison would know what I meant by that. So.
Well, it was good to know that he was, doing what he was trained to do, and it gave me an idea of where he was in my mind, and what was involved. And obviously he was home safely, because I was always worried, for his safety, given such limited information.
Like Steve Will, Mike Grover has completed his 2-month tour in Aviano and is back home in Cold Lake. He trains with a new intensity, for in time he'll be posted back to serve another tour with the Balkan Rats.
Having been over there in a real war scenario, it makes you think a lot more. Obviously, each night before the mission, you're doing a lot of thinking about home and family and all that. And it was special to come back, that's for sure, after having been there for 2 months.
Up in order! March!
In Aviano, a change of command. Colonel Bill Flynn is heading home. His place taken by Colonel Duff Sullivan. Both men command squadrons at Cold Lake.
Welcome. Thank you. Congratulations. Since the bombing campaign ended, we have downsized our operation here considerably. We know that we could be asked with only a moment's notice to go back into some type of operation where we would be called in to support all the ground forces that are on the ground in Macedonia and Kosovo and throughout that region. So for us, it's still a very significant, important mission that we're doing over here.
You folks were here fighting the fight, and your efforts and accomplishments and achievements are unprecedented.
I think Canadians should be proud of the men and women that came here and fought this conflict. The whole team here pulled together for over 70 days of 24 hours, 7 days a week operations.
For the Canadians, victory in the most successful air war since the Korean conflict. For them, the Kosovo campaign begins a new chapter in Air Force history. Written by the Balkan Rats.
For more information on aviation, log on to Discovery Channel's website, exn.ca.